Hello, everyone. This is Jeffrey Garfield, and we have an exceptional show this evening where we are going to be discussing a fraternity that I belong to and is dear to my heart, and that's Phi Eta Psi Incorporated Fraternity. And here with us is an absolutely special guest. I'm getting goosebumps just actually meeting him and being in his presence. And that's one of our founders who in 1965 created Phi Eta Psi Fraternity. And that's Brother Jihad Hassan Sharif, who by his government name was Jerome Davis. If he may at some point talk about his transition to the Muslim faith and how that kind of dovetails with his founding of an incredible fraternity. Also, we have the honor of being joined by our current national president, Dr. Eddie Cargor Sr. And he's been in office, for, I think, for a couple of years now. And he'll be also talking about the current activities of the fraternity and also looking to the future. And the other is a very, very dear friend of mine, Ricky Bradford, who we used to call PJ in undergrad at Alabama State University, Kappa Chapter. And he is now the branding and marketing chairman for the fraternity, and is doing an exceptional job, of which this project, this video, is a big part of. And he's reached out to other founding fathers, and we'll have other subsequent interviews. But right now, I want to welcome my brothers to this podcast to discuss the origins and the activities and, of course, the future of Phi Eta Psi Fraternity, which was founded in 1965. Gentlemen, welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Let me start with our president, Dr. Cargor. What's Phi Eta Psi in 2022? And then we're going to go to our founder and talk about 1965. Dr. Cargor.
Phi Eta Psi is a good paradigm shift from when the fraternity first started in 1965 and has matriculated into the 21st century. And before I can really talk about what Phi Eta Psi is today, I have to give homage to the 8 founding fathers that founded this organization. And so we've had the luxury of standing on their shoulders and reaching high into the stratosphere, into the 21st century. So as I see the fraternity now, as we build upon some of the building blocks of the past of academic excellence, being involved in the community, brotherly love, and just being able to take that and begin to build upon reaching out to new millenniums to offer them the same opportunity to be in such a great organization. Now we're centered on mentorship, scholarship, and internship, to be able to help them matriculate undergraduate school, building a mentorship relationship with the brothers, both near and far, helping them matriculate through a bridge into internship to position them perfectly for gainful employment, so that they can not only contribute to the organization, but also to society and the community as a whole.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Cargor. Brother Jihad, let's go back, all the way back to 1965. And what inspired brothers to create an organization, particularly in the midst of other long-standing organizations like Alpha Phi Alpha, Phi Beta Sigma, Kappa Alpha Psi, that started back in the early 1900s and adopted the Greek philosophy of the fraternal order. So in 1965, in the midst of, quite frankly, was the Black nationalists period. The Civil Rights Movement was at its peak. It was transitioning to the Black Power movement, led by Stokely Carmichael and articulated by my personal hero, Adam Clayton Powell Jr., the great congressman from Harlem. So, as a general context, what inspired 8 young Black men to start a new fraternity in the midst of all that?
Well, very, very interesting question. I must say that I am honored and I am humbled both to have the opportunity to say something about this organization and the individuals that founded it. You know, we had, Flint was a very interesting city, manufacturing city in 65. And I think the general context was getting out of high school, getting into college, and going on from there. But there was some very dynamic young men who had this idea. One was Willie Buck. Second was, I would say, was James Humphreys, Rodney Harris, myself, and Eugene Talbert.
Mm-hmm.
We had started at Flint Junior College, and there was an energy that seemed to form around this charismatic brother named Willie Buck. I know when you spoke about hearing me, I still have that same energy and charge when I think about Willie Buck, who in 1965 and 1964 being involved in athletics and being the kind of person that he was, could bring or could, who could bring the unity and thought of an idea like this into a reality. Mm-hmm. He was that kind of person. Well, Humphrey was there. He and Humphrey were going to, I believe, Northern. And Rodney and I had met recently because his older brother married my sister. Mm-hmm. And that's how the four of us and Eugene and a few other brothers began to meet. So maybe it was that it was a niche. Maybe there was a niche in the kind of city that Flint was. Maybe there wasn't other fraternities that were strong. And Phi Eta Psi seemed to have a niche in that city that brought us all together. So here we are 50-some years later, and we say, how did that happen? That's about the best I can do, brother.
Well, tell us about the initial meeting. I mean, at some point, somebody said, hey, let's start our own fraternity, and this is the name it's going to be.
Well, I think around that point in time, James Humphrey owned a record shop, or his family owned a record shop on Leith Street and Flint. And Humphrey was the kind of person, as well as Buck, who knew people and people responded to them. I didn't know, probably a year prior to that, I didn't know Willie Buck, I didn't know James Humphrey, but I knew Rodney. Rodney had moved to the South Side. So the energy between the 3 or 4 or 5 of us, we needed a place to meet. Then his record shop became that place, and the idea began to form and grow into a reality.
So who brought it up?
Oh, that would have been Willie Buck.
Okay.
Yeah, that would have been Willie Buck.
You have to move more to the center.
Okay.
No, the other way, the other way.
This way. Maybe I can just move this that way.
There you go. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yeah. Willie was a charismatic person. He played, he was a star. He was a star in track around the city. He was a star in football around the city. He was a very handsome young man, and folks, I would say, tended to gravitate. If Willie Buck talked about it, then it was something that that more than one person would talk about it. Willie Buck began to talk about it, and Humphrey began to talk about it. Then that was the northern part of the city right there. They had connections and they knew people and they were respected. James Humphrey's family was a family of his father and his mother, and they were business people. And people listened. You know, there was what was that commercial about that stock company that said when this, that's right, when they talk, people listen. So we had Willie Buck, we had James Humphrey. They were respected, they were charismatic young men, and to be truthful, them two wasn't afraid of much at all.
Who came up with the name, with the designation Phi Eta Psi?
I would say that was Willie Buck. Willie Buck.
And did he tell you why? I mean, he must have done some research.
You know, dear brother, I'm going back maybe 55 years or so. I couldn't find my keys this morning.
Fair enough.
I couldn't find my keys this morning. And so the exact mix or how it came about, but I just remember Willie Buck. I remember him. I remember Humphreys was a person who would challenge himself, challenge you, challenge everyone around him to reach for something that even though it was not an idea that we could put our hand on, if you were around those brothers, you felt that it was something that would be, that we could accomplish. So somehow here we are 50 some years later. And I think that's the reality that I remember. If you were around those brothers, we can do it. So there wasn't a thought about we couldn't do it. If those brothers felt that it was an idea, then we could work together. And that's what we begin to do in having events where we would promote the name or cabarets. I think we were all a year into Flint Junior College, but that's how it, I would say, evolved.
You know, looking at the at our shield, I see there's a black fist in the middle, and certainly that's a symbol of Black power. As you know, again, defined. This is founding in 1965. How important was the so-called Black Power movement and Black nationalist movement then? On how did that affect the philosophy that you were creating within this fraternity?
Well, that's going to be a bit of an interesting question for me on how we evolved from that. Because about a year beyond that, in 1967, early 1967, I moved to Chicago. Okay, so I have been away from the fraternity. I mean, I've had relationships with Humphrey. I had relationship with Rondi ever since he and my sister got married. But I lived in Chicago, I lived in Los Angeles. So even though I don't have a recollection of the Black Power movement, for me, it was going to Chicago. When there were riots and Dr. King was martyred in Chicago, and the country and the Black communities erupted. That was the wake-up call for me. So, but I don't remember the fist being on the shield. But with the way that the environment was and the pressure was and the oppression was throughout our communities, I think that is, those events is what brought it into fruition. So I don't know if the fist came later or what, but you could not escape the reality of what it meant to be Black and living in America in those days.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Cargor, while we're talking about the shield, we had been talking earlier, for what you can you talk about what elements of the shield that are now incorporated, what values they represent?
Yeah, and if I may, just kind of try to bridge the gap between Brother Jihad's touch points on the shield and him not really being able to point to our current shield. That is because at the time that evolved, and Brother Bradford probably have some of the images that will support what I'm saying, but there was an evolution as with everything else from what the founding fathers put on the table to the evolution of that current shield. If you really look at what originally they had put before us, it was truly representative of the era that they found themselves in. And so as time went on, as we developed more chapters, each chapter contribute greatly to their vision. And so it became a evolution of sorts. And so I believe when you look at now that shield, it's somewhat a piece that you see that covers the crest. And so I would be willing to say that a lot of the artwork that was originally developed found itself within our crest. And then later on, as things evolved, the brothers felt there should be a certain measure of anonymity and sacredness to the crest. So the shield began to take the out front look in hiding the crest. And so a lot of the takeaways from the founding fathers will probably find itself more eloquently within the crest, that eventually some of the factors evolved into what you see now as the shield. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I won't go into any deeper than that because that's inside knowledge, like other organizations, particularly like the Masons. What they deal with is, to the public, is symbiology and allegory, which mask deeper understandings and deeper knowledge that is only available to those who pass the crossover, as we say, during the pledge process. But let me have a little fun here because at Kappa Chapter at Alabama State University, our pledge process was 9 weeks, which was much longer than the other fraternities. They went just for a month, pretty much. But we had 9 enduring weeks of indoctrination, bonding with your line, your brothers, similar to the military. But along with that comes a transformation. Again, like in the military, you come as a raw recruit, and they treat you like dirt. But you come in as an individual, but on the other end, you're supposed to come out as a soldier who is a part of a machine, who performs in almost mechanical unity. And we do that in the pledge process. But let's start with our line names. So let me start with our founding father. What was your line name, and what did it represent?
I mean, was the original, was that, I'm not sure if it was that Alpha. I've heard how that how names were related, I've just considered myself a founder, and maybe there was a name that was that we were called, but I think that the name that I recall most easily was a founder, and as I've said before, my travels in my life are probably about a year after that took me away from the fraternity on a day-to-day basis, you know. So there are some questions that I am not that definite regarding. So y'all have to help me with that, Dr. Cargor.
My brother Ricky certainly has a line name. I've always known him as PJ, which I later found out was meant pajamas. So PJ Ricky, what's the story behind that?
Well, going back to 1977, my line name was my line's name was the Chili 16. There were 16 of us, and it was an amazing, diverse group. In fact, speaking to diversity, our group had a Panamanian, an Asian Chinese, and a Latin Puerto Rican on the line. And these brothers were as amazing and together as all of us. And mind you, we were at an HBCU, Alabama State University, that encompassed and had started in the 70s, embracing diversity on its own level. But we went actually 13 weeks, Geoffrey, not 9 weeks. And my line name PJ, I had that name prior to coming in, and it was synonymous with some of my atrocious or outrageous sleepwear. So and then the other parts of it, at my discretion, I choose to keep because it was more towards my interactions with the ladies at that time. So, but and fun. That name stuck with me because it's nice and clean and simple, and I'm just the kind of brother that I just like to be a part and contribute, as well as I like a very simple brand in identifying myself. My name is Roderick Reginald Bradford, as far as the legal instances go, and that's way too formal for us to be comfortable with each other. I just want to be PJ. So that's how it goes.
Okay, Dr. Cargor, you have a pretty elaborate name. You sound like a AM radio DJ with that name. What was your line name?
Well, my to brother PJ's point, my line name was the 2 steps of ecstasy from slavery to freedom. And we had started out with about 18. And historically at EMU, we always launched our lines around Super Bowl Sunday. In this case, because I went through during the fall, I didn't have that luxury. So we started out with 18. We lasted well beyond 9-10 weeks, seemed like it went on forever. And it wound up being me and my Sans, Michael Robinson. But a lot happened from 18 down to 2. So our experience kind of resonated with from slavery to freedom, because we didn't, when we was going through to become part of the organization, we didn't have our freedoms. We had to report every day. We had, it was regimented. And so we tailored that line name behind that experience. My frat name was Cool Papa Stoppa, Sweet Daddy Dewdropper. And it was kind of a blend between, I knew everybody, I was cool with the other organizations, the other brothers, but to Brother PJ's point, there was a balance with my association with the ladies. And so I tried to capture all that in one breath. And so that's kind of how that came about. But one thing I want to touch on, and I want to definitely acknowledge the fact that ordinarily when you have someone finding something, it's an old saying, he who has the gold, the green and gold in this case, makes the rules. And so it would have not made sense for them to come through into the organization the way we came through, because they're the one that discovered the organization. I mean, they would have to almost take themselves through that experience.
Right.
So they pretty much by default, the honor was bestowed upon them because of their precepts and examples and what they did to bring this organization to fruition. So it's like a company. When you found a company, now you develop the hiring practices and all of that. And so I see that no different.
No, that's a great point. Thank you very much. I'll share with you, my line name was Wall Street. And I was in the College of Business, and also I'm from New York City. So I can't remember who coined the name. I will remember, it'll pop up. But it wasn't just my name. Whenever they called, I'm online, whenever they called my name Wall Street, I was supposed to respond by saying, up 1.2 of the stock market. At first I'm like, what am I doing here? It became fun, and it became part of our process in our relationship. And I appreciated the name because it both symbolized, my studying, business administration with concentration in marketing, but also my origins from New York and where Wall Street is located. So I was very complimented by it. And our line name, we of course over in 1979, was T Connection. Now T Connection was a popular band back in the 70s. But the first person on our line who naturally becomes the leader, even though he's the shortest, that was Terrence Gibbs, who's a very, very dear friend of mine. And Terrence Gibbs decided that we was going to name the line after him. And he just used the cover of T Connection, the name of the group. And nobody objected because Terrence was up. He was truly definitely a leader. And he was a great guy. So we called ourselves T Connection. And that's a story behind.
Now let me just say for the record, I crossed into the organization or matriculated into the organization December the 8th, 1976.
Okay, yeah, very good. So at its peak, the organization had 29 chapters, undergrad and alumni chapters. After EMU, what was the beta chapter, second chapter organized?
Well, we had Alpha, Beta, Gamma, Delta, Epsilon. So Epsilon, I believe, was out in Washington State, okay. East Washington State, I believe. And so we just kind of followed the process of the Greek alphabet. So after Delta would have been Epsilon, Zeta. Zeta would have been out at U of M. As a matter of fact, when I was online, we had a dual thing going on because you had Amos Goodlow and I'm trying to think of the brother online at U of M at I want to say Zeta chapter, while I was online at Eastern. Mm-hmm. So both of those were I think DeAndre Rudolph, Amos Goodlow and DeAndre Rudolph were coming through as we were coming through. And that was at Zeta chapter, which was close by where we are. And I believe Brother Doug Gibbs may have been the founder of that chapter.
Mm-hmm. But, Ricky, because we're members of Kappa Chapter, could you talk about its origins, how it came about?
Kappa Chapter had four founding fathers, Brother Greg Singleton,
Mhm.
Brother Alfred Bruce Bradley, Maurice, and his last name escapes me, and Brother Hubert Dixon. And Brother Maurice, rest in peace, was an amazing photographer, one of many that came through Kappa Chapter. But those, and from those four brothers who came from the northeast or northwest in Michigan, they came on campus more like a quiet storm because they were very, as someone mentioned earlier, they got along with everybody. They were very unassuming, but they carried themselves very distinguished and in a way that was admirable for any young person
Yes.
looking
Yes.
to be about something. And they had a kind of charisma and magnetism that didn't make you want to be the ordinary. You wanted to be kind of like them. And speaking for myself, I did not want to be a part of just one of the groups and one of the norm. And I come from that because most of the time I was always quiet and unassuming. I went about my business, and while I had a connection with people because of I was an athlete too, I just didn't. I didn't connect with those because I found them in Shiloh's, and that didn't have any appeal. But back to your question and staying on that, those brothers founded it. They prior to me becoming a member, there were a series of lines that crossed ahead of me, and as they built, all of those people I was familiar with and
Mm-hmm.
comfortable with, and they also had some of that same persona of not trying to flaunt our green and gold colors and stuff, but just be good people to all people. And I love that particular message to things because I guess for lack of any other way to say this, it was more of a non-threatening, embracing kind of a place.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that to be a place of engagement for me. And ironically, when I actually knew I wanted to be a part of it was when I found out that their principles were about family, about community, and about brotherhood without being physical. And the physical part I'm talking about is without the hazing part.
Mm-hmm.
Because I grew up at a time where, quite frankly, it was rough. I had an abusive stepfather who showed me the belt and many other things many times that became that over the line stuff. And I didn't feel like brothers needed to, quite frankly, um, hit me or beat me to and then hug me and call me your brother. I just don't I didn't see that philosophy. I needed something different, and what I found to be more attractive was I met the faculty advisor who was my mentor and who is a reason of my whole photography career and progress in that. Reginald Jenkins, who we affectionately call Bomar, he was very instrumental in a quiet way. Never asked me to join, never asked me to do anything, but all between him, between Bruce, between Greg Singleton, between some of the other brothers, that was my key and link, and that's where I knew I wanted to at least devote my time to. And needless to say, I didn't know what I was getting into when I got in with 15 other brothers. And these brothers, most of them I did not know. I only knew a couple. But over those 13 weeks, we lived together. We stayed in the same house. Um, we worked out like we were in a boot camp because the mind and the body, they were tight, man. We were so in shape. We looked good. We felt good. And yes, there were 16 different minds and a dean of pledge. that managed to get us to be on one page after about the eighth week, and they loved us, man. I mean,
Well, you bring up some really, really good points, particularly about the great Reginald Jenkins, who I was exposed to pretty early in my freshman year. He was an incredible photographer and multimedia, and he put on, you recall, he had put together a short film with some
yes,
grand music, and I recall this bunch of white horses running on a beach, but it was like about a 30-minute short film, and man, we left there. Wow, we were left there like with our jaws, dragging the ground because it was such an incredible piece of visual art. And then in that, that was my first introduction to Reginald. And I'm like, who is this guy? And I sought him out. I was my freshman year. I was working with the student newspaper. I was assistant editor, and also with the student government. I was a off-campus senator, and I did that for 4 years. But Reginald was my first exposure to Phi Eta Psi without realizing it was Phi Eta Psi, because a lot of Reginald's values, particularly his intellectualism, a lot of times he speaks very abstractly, but you got to follow him. But I felt that this was a person that I really wanted to emulate. And once I found out he was the faculty advisor to Phi Eta Psi, I seriously started looking at it as a freshman. Is this an organization I want to be a part of? Of course, I didn't decide until the following year. But let's talk about Reginald. I mean, how did you
Mm.
know? What did he impart to you as a faculty advisor of this organization on this campus?
I think that you phrased it real well. He spoke abstractly, and if you paid attention, you could grab it, and sometimes you had to marinate on it. But even if you marinate on it, you would get it, and you would be even today. I think he's 77. When I talk to him today, he inspires me
Hmm.
to no end, and I almost like wish I had like an intravenous feed to him on a regular basis because of how I'm so enamored with the stuff that comes out of his mouth. Because sometimes he says it, and I think he tries to see how he can shock you, but also move you to do something that isn't just. And he always speaks in terms of what I believe the founding fathers had some of their spirit to, and that's our blackness and being able to express it in ways that we were limited or restricted to doing. So Reginald, in a very brief way, because I could go on and on about him, but
Mm.
Reginald took me, uh, a guy who knew nothing about a camera, handed it to me as a player student, and told me to go out on campus and shoot lifestyle. And the rest is history. I have 35 plus years of photography experience, and it propelled me at some point way after to realize this was the direction I wanted to take as a career
Hmm.
in building a foundation which has allowed me to raise 4 children, have 7 grandkids, and be able to also be so moved by this green and gold. There are brothers like Reginald, the Bruce Bradleys, the Greg
Mm.
Singletons,
Mm.
brothers like Dr. Eddie Cargor,
That's
Ron Hawkins, um,
mm.
D. Smith. All of these guys have been like breaths of fresh air for me.
Mm.
And I say
Okay.
that because I go from a place of, I come from the projects, but I also at one time stayed out in the rural area. So I was a city boy from Alabama. And all of these influences have affected me immensely.
Okay. Thank you. Just so folks know, when PJ talks about him being a ladies' man, that he was one of the major photographers on the campus had a lot to do with that, because most of the pictures he was taking of the most beautiful sisters on the campus, and really kind of everybody, because everybody wanted to preserve in photography, their youthfulness and energy. And he got to know just about everybody on campus. in their various poses, and that was always I always thought that was just a good cover to get dates, and it worked out. But Brother Cargor, Dr. Cargor,
Mhm.
when we had a Zoom meeting, I guess a year or so ago, I really got very struck and, in my own part, very emotional listening to, because there's a whole lot of brothers from all over the country on that Zoom. And man, it just seems so interesting how similar all of us were in terms of our personalities. And even though we had various choices, again, from, Alpha, Kappas, Sigmas, and the Qs to choose from on campus, my experience was that my father wanted me to be an alpha, although he wasn't. He was very respectful of the organization. Um, the alphas in our campus just weren't. They were not cool guys, but they just weren't the guys I was hanging out with. The guys I was hanging out with were mostly from the north in the Midwest. It's big city guys. Detroit, most certainly, Chicago, D.C., um, and New York and Jersey and all that. So I kind of gravitated to those folks. And Phi Eta Psi seemed to attract them too. And so when it was my turn to choose where I was going, it was a natural that I was going to go with the guys I was already hanging out with, and with not only PJ, but James Montague Smith was one of the photographers on the campus, Al Warren, and even Angel Simmons. All four of them were Phi Eta Psi, and they had dominated, the camera, photography market. And by the way, they charged people, to take the get a headshots and stuff. So that was their side hustle, which for Montague and Ricky became their professional careers. So Dr. Cargor, do you see kind of a general or even a specific characteristic that attracts young Black men to this organization as opposed to the others?
Well, let me first speak about my experience in terms of what attracted me. And as we reflect back on our founding fathers, which is really the purposeful Zoom meeting we're having here, it's hard, in addition to them, to not speak about more eloquently about Brother D. Smith and what Brother Durrell Smith meant to Delta Chapter. When you mention Phi Eta Psi, you can't really put a period behind that sentence unless you mention Brother D. Smith as part of the overall conversation, who is no longer with us. He passed away about a year ago, but he left such a mark on this organization. And you know how they say, put a 5 on it. I think what Brother D. Smith did was to take what the founding fathers handed him and put a 5 on it,
Mm-hmm.
meaning that that's when you really begin to see the fraternity transforming to a whole nother level. He really captivated their vision. And not only did he captivate their vision, he was able to duplicate that in a lot of us in a lot of different ways. And so when you're looking at succession planning and when you're looking at the longevity of an organization, if you have someone that's a vehicle or a conduit between the original and the future, it's very important that they be able to tap into that vision and not water it down. And if they're going to do something to change it, add to it. And that's exactly what he did. So I said that about Brother D. Smith because he was a major part of me coming into the organization. I didn't know it until I got to the organization because I came into the organization. I was a freshman. I was a first semester freshman. I actually pledged when I wasn't supposed to pledge, but I had been exposed to the organization because I ran track at Northern High School in Detroit. And Brother PJ and I have similar backgrounds. I grew up on the North End in the projects, the Brewsters, the Jeffreys, very poor. As a matter of fact, one Christmas we were so poor, we got a pair of shoestrings to lace up our toes. But I'm saying that to say that, so when I got to Eastern, it was a matter of life and death for me because I knew that if I stayed in that neighborhood, I was going to die. and track was my out to go to school. So one of my colleagues who graduated before I did, he went to Eastern, he ran track, he pledged Phi Eta Psi. So when I came up there for Huron relays at Eastern, he invited me by his dorm room, and I was amongst all the brothers. I knew then that when I graduated from high school, what I was going to do. So my first semester, I was able to, through a little favor, get online, and the rest is history. But when I came in, so to your original question, why Phi Eta Psi? I've always been a leader. You know, I was lead dog online. I've always felt like the view is a lot better out front. So when everybody else was banging her left, I banged her right. When everybody else was getting into some of those other organizations, I quickly realized that I don't want to be part of something where I was passing out flyers and just going to parties. I wanted to be part of an organization where I can, it didn't matter what they could do for me. It was about what I could do to help it grow. And so I wanted to be able to come in, and maybe one day they'll read my names in history books. But a lot of those other organizations, 1906 and 1912, it was already baked in. So I've always been attracted to something that was new, something that was fresh, because that's kind of how I felt. Joined the Marine Corps. It was the smallest branch of the service, you know, but I've always gravitated to, quote unquote, the underdog, to pretty much add to it to help the organization move forward.
Thank you for that. Found the Jihad, you know, as you guys, our eight brothers were talking about the future of the organization. What kind of brothers did you think that you'd be able to recruit? What kind of values were you looking for? What kind of initiate personalities were you looking for when you decided to, again, attract the first line to the organization?
Okay. If I can speak to that a bit. And for me, it is interesting listening to the three of you. It is so interesting because I think if I would have been back around the time that you were part of this organization, it was the same kind of thing that would have attracted me, you know, were you brothers. And hearing you now where you've been in your life, it's like these are the kind of brothers I would want to be around. How 50 some years ago, there was this kind of character, subtle or whatever, in each of us that continued to attract people like yourselves. It seems like that was a magnetic force that there is still. When I listened to you all, and maybe it was something that you were listening to or wanted to be part of, that was an attraction. And I still hear the same thing when I hear you all talking, when I hear Dr. talking, when I hear Ricky talking. I could still sit with you brothers today, and I hope that that's something that we can do more of.
Yes.
How can I say it other than that, brother?
Great. Let me ask you, what was your career? I think you're retired now. What was your career?
Well, that was part of the reason that I moved to Chicago. I was working in the factory. I had done maybe a year of college. My initial thought about college was elementary education. And I think I would have done well in that because I still love children. You know, I've got a 2-year-old next to me. And I watched this young man with his energy as he's outside in the parking lot. You know, I love children. And, but that 4 years seemed to be a bit long for me. Maybe that's a part of me in my life. So I took a course in computer operations and programming. This was 1966. I had read an article in Reader's Digest. And that career carried me once I moved to Chicago and found a job moving stock at midnight. that's where I ended up for 25, 26 years. But when I would go to the front, to the salary part of the GM plant I was working at, then apparently I didn't have a degree or that kind of thing. So I was recently married and we shipped out to Chicago, the south side of Chicago. And we lived there from 67 to 70. But after that, I had 2.5 years of experience. So I was quite easily able to find work in Ann Arbor and to move to Los Angeles. So about 25 years, I was able to take care of my family in the computer field, primarily as a mainframe computer operator. That's what I did till probably 92, 93, from 67 or so.
Do you recall the professions of the other 7 founders?
No, I don't. Let's see. Ronnie went into the Army for a bit, and I think he was a bus driver when he got to Los Angeles. And I think Willie Buck, I know he worked for Consumer Power for a while. Humphrey, U of M, and I think he's still a businessman. I still think he does business consulting for the most part. Crush and I were raised up within a block of each other on the south side of Flint, Michigan, and his family moved about the time I think we graduated from high school. I knew a good deal of his family. But that's about it for the most part. As I said, again, 67, I had to say goodbye to Flint, you know, so as our lives kind of evolved, it was kind of connecting with Ronnie or what the fraternity was doing. Although I did come back to Ann Arbor, I did come back to Ypsilanti, and we opened a black bookstore. Mm-hmm. That must have been about 1972, down the hill from the water tower. Dr. Cargor may remember that water tower, and we opened a black bookstore. We used to take books over to U of M, and that was an important part of the bookstore surviving. I guess I had this entrepreneurial part of me, probably from my father, and I probably would not have ran around the country trying to find a niche when my father was the kind of person, a Georgia boy, may I say, with all due respect, who built our house, built a grocery store on the south side of Flint, did move-ons, and this is all back in 1965, 64, and he worked in the foundry as well. Mm-hmm. He had a spirit about work and entrepreneurship that I didn't recognize. And I probably spent a good part of my life trying to see my father and what my father was doing. So I think that was even part of my gravitating toward do for self and the Nation of Islam, and Islam in the respect that it was promoted by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad and has continued through the life of Malcolm and Minister Farrakhan to the broader world. But it was in my father. But there was something about that with my father that the communication part wasn't there. I didn't understand why he came from Georgia. Why did he come up north? Why did he work so much? But those answers about that became part of what my life was going to guide me in my life. And that was doing for self and entrepreneurship.
Well, it just popped in my head that when you mentioned the nation, because I was very greatly influenced by the nation in New York for a lot of reasons, mainly because of the Malcolm X lived in my neighborhood. The house that was burned down is just 6 blocks from where I grew up. And after him, because that was a patronage, the pastor's house. And after him came the Farrakhan family, and I grew up with his sons, Lewis, Wallace, and Joshua, and we played football together, and we had sleepovers together, and I went to Temple with them, in Temple number 7 in Harlem.
Yes.
We used to all jump in the car, all the kids. He had 9 children, and my brother and I, my twin brother and I, all in this car, driven by his wife, like 90 miles an hour across Triborough Bridge, man. I thought I was gonna die driving with her. But she, gathering on all these kids is like kitten herding. And so I guess she was always running late, and she was zooming over the bridge to number 7. But again, I was very, very well indoctrinated. And many people in my community of East Elmhurst, Queens, were in the nation, essentially Malcolm's lieutenants. And I also knew Captain Yusef Shah,
Yes.
who was head of the Fruit of Islam, founder of the Fruit of Islam. So I was, so that I say all that to say that the whole Black nationalist thing was kind of imbued in me, from the beginning in my own neighborhood, and certainly the Nation of Islam culture would have a great influence on me. So I just wanted to mention that along with your comments about the nation. Let me ask you about, when did the Emeralds start? I was familiar with the women's auxiliary organizations, the various organizations. My father was a Mason, a Prince Hall Mason, and my mother was the Eastern Star. So I understand the role and the absolute importance of including our queens in our organization. But were you around when the Emeralds started? And if not, Brother Cargor, do you have any history on that?
Can I inject one thing real quick? Brother
Sure.
Jihad, you want to wipe your left nostril, um, as mucus and stuff that comes out. We want you looking your best on camera. That's all.
Okay.
Thank you,
By
brother.
the way, I'm
For
keeping this
sure.
for the recording, just so you
It's
know.
all family.
Don't worry about it. It'll be edited out, brother.
That's a brother.
There you go. That's right.
That's a brother.
Great. Thank you,
brother.
Thank you, Ricky.
The Emeralds were there when I showed up at Eastern, but to my understanding, I don't know when that evolved, but I do know that it was a lot of, that's where family comes in, because a lot of the either girlfriends or wives or aunties or cousins were always that shoulder to lean on, as the brothers were bringing this organization forward. As a matter of fact, I wish Brother Howard Humphrey was on the line. He's the brother of James Humphrey, younger brother, and he often talks about how a lot of the discussions that occurred involving Phi Eta Psi occurred in Juanita Crump's basement. So there's some history there, but I brought that into the picture to say that women has always played a major role in most movements, and this one is no different. So when I came to Eastern, and let me just go back, just to give you a backdrop in terms of what my belief is in terms of how some of the things gave rise to this organization with the founding fathers. It would be surprising to me if they didn't look at all the other organizations to try to build a template on, because that was there, black, white, or whatever. And they found their own identity and uniqueness within that space. Well, within that space, most of those, at least black organizations, had sister organizations. They had the Kappa Kittens and the Alpha Ain't, So I think at some point somebody had an aha moment and said, oh, hold on here, let's create our own little sisters. and that gave rise to the emeralds. So when I got to Eastern, we had our own set of ladies that was providing some of the heavy lifting. And so they eventually created their own organization, much more before I got there, which became the Emeralds. And I think that began to springboard throughout each chapter, where they had some assistance through a ladies group called the Emeralds.
Thank you. Well, let's, as we wrap this up, let me ask, go the full spectrum here. Brother Jihad, I'd like you to address, what do you see as the future of the organization? And then I'd like for our president, Dr. Cargor, to also kind of wrap that up. What's his vision for the future post 2022? So beginning with you, Brother Jihad, founder Jihad, what do you see as the future of Phi Eta Psi?
Okay. Very, very interesting question. And I think, to me, that is the important point as to what our life is about, what our projection is about for the future. Is kind of like myself. I know my age, and at times my wife is, and we will talk, and it's about, shouldn't I be trying just to put my slippers on right now instead of trying to go to this country or that country, or seeing something interesting about life that I still want to do or accomplish and have an aspiration about. And that's where I think we are as an organization. Yes, Phi Psi has been able to accomplish something. I don't think anything more greater than the individuals that whose life we have become part of in each other's life. And that's been good. But where do we go from here? Where do we go where we have these individuals like yourself, Dr. Kilgore? Where do we go with all this energy in these people's lives? Many of us may be senior citizens, but what can we do with this energy, with the experience that we have found in our life? Where do we go from here? So as I hear that there are initiatives or thoughts about what we can do with our future, and historically, my thoughts are, with the energy that we have, how can we contribute? And I think I heard Dr. Kilgore say mentorship. It's got to be about the future. It's got to be about the future. Maybe the accolades about our past, but I think what is important is that we see that there is something that we can contribute to our future of young people. We're hurt each time that we see young people involved in something that is costing us our future, whether it's young people or teenagers or kids who are riding in the car, and have their lives altered or taken. We've got to find a way that we can take the love that we share and find ways that we can contribute, whether it's orphans and a vision there, but maybe it's across the whole spectrum of the expertise that each of us have, or groups of us have, that we can contribute to our future. And maybe that will mean us meeting and finding niches that we can contribute to, so that we can have a future that lasts another 50 years. That's what I think.
Thank you for that. Dr. Cargor, looking to the future, what does Phi Eta Psi look like 10, 15 years from now?
Okay, got it. Just to reiterate what Brother just said, Phi Eta Psi was built on the foundation of true trust and belief in oneself and one's brother. I mean, it's simply the everlasting fraternal brotherhood, from one to another, brother to brother. So that's our treasured experience. And through that experience, we're offering the green and gold roadmap to success. And as I mentioned earlier, that first pillar is participating in mentorship initiatives to be able to reach back to our youth to help them matriculate into the 21st century as we realize our end state goals and objectives. And in doing so, obviously, we need some funding. So that's utilizing that scholarship platform to provide support for current and future leaders. And it's no secret that we inspire to achieve and motivate new leaders to become productive members of society. And last but not least, a lot of that will come to fruition by exploring internship and other opportunities in various occupations or disciplines to be a bridge over to that success and to help them get a good start into gainful employment.
Okay, thank you very much. With that, gentlemen, I'd like to conclude this, but to give everyone an opportunity to say some final words on the discussion of our great fraternity. So we'll start with Ricky. You have any final words you'd like to express?
It's been a privilege to be a part of this. That in itself is monumental and inspiring for me. And I think as a final word, for me, it's love to all, and only love can conquer hate. So whatever we're out here doing, be inspired by the fact that let's work together, and that's the part of this brotherhood that I appreciate the most, because no matter where I go and who I see, when we're recognized as a brother, there's an embrace, there's a handshake, there's a fellowship and a connection that means something more than just walking by somebody or walking through a situation and not seeing the person. So I look forward to not only what we're doing today, but what's going to be done tomorrow. And I believe in what we're doing as a part of the overall contribution to mankind.
Thank you, PJ. Dr. Cargor, any final words?
Yes, as I sit here and listen, I'm having an out of body experience because, I would have never imagined when I first came into this organization that I would have the luxury and benefit to sit before one of our founding fathers. And so I don't take that lightly. I mean, this is huge for me. And this is almost a dream come true. And I don't mean to boast, but if it ain't Phi Psi, it ain't. And I've been taught if a task is once begun, should never leave it until it's done. Be it little, great, or small, you should do it well or not at all. So I want to send out a special charge to my brothers. If not now, then when? If not this, then what? And if not you, then who?
Thank you very much, brother. That's inspiring. Well, we've heard from Brother Jihad, who was one of the founders, and he got the first word. Here, you get the last word. Brother Jihad, any last comments?
But it is hard not to have a word to follow up, but coming behind Dr. Cargor, coming behind yourself, coming behind Brother Ricky, I'm full. You brothers have inspired me to be in your company.
Don't start, because I'm going to start crying too, brother.
Who would have thought, man? Who would have thought? I had no idea. Who would have thought that 50 years later, I would be in the company of young men, of men like yourself, and talking about building something. So I need to be an ongoing part of this. You know, I want to be a part of a future. Maybe there's something that I can contribute, but I'm inspired by your work and your lives. You know, just like there's a certain part of what the founders did to inspire you, it gives me an energy that I don't know where it comes from, but it charges my heart and it charges my soul. Thank you for keeping this alive. And Brother Willie Buck and Brother James Humphrey, the flag is still waving. Thank you, brothers.
You are inspiring. I'm gonna compose myself here. I'm inspired by your words. I'm inspired by your deeds and your history, and we greatly appreciate you, brother. So let's complete this. And I want to thank Ricky. I want to thank Dr. Cargor for participating in this. This will be the first of many. To my brother founder, assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much. Peace.
Peace. Thank you.
Okay, that ends that.